In the rugged mountains of New Mexico, 1985 lives Dakota Whitehorse, a 30-year-old Apache man standing 6'8" tall, with hands like tree trunks and a heart as vast as the desert sky. Known throughout the reservation for his gentle nature, despite his intimidating size, Dakota works as a tracker and hunter, following the old ways his grandfather taught him. When he discovers a magnificent gray wolf caught in cruel barbed wire during his morning hunt, what begins as a simple rescue becomes a life-changing bond that will test everything he believes about trust, healing, and the ancient connection between man and nature. This is a story of unlikely friendship, devastating loss, and the kind of love that transcends species, leading to an ending so powerful it will leave hearts forever changed. The morning mist clung to the pine trees like ancestral spirits as Dakota Whitehorse stepped out of his small wooden cabin. At 6 feet 8 inches tall and weighing nearly 300 pounds, he moved with surprising grace across the forest floor. His long black hair was braided down his back, and turquoise beads caught the early sunlight that filtered through the canopy above. The year was 1985, and while the world beyond these mountains rushed toward a digital future, Dakota lived by the rhythm of seasons and the wisdom of his ancestors. "Another day, another hunt," he whispered to himself in his deep, rumbling voice that seemed to echo from the earth itself. His grandfather had always said that talking to the forest was the first rule of being a good hunter. "The trees listen, boy, and if you show them respect, they'll guide you to what you need." Dakota adjusted the leather satchel across his massive shoulder and picked up his rifle, an old Winchester that had belonged to his father. He wasn't hunting for sport or trophy. The reservation store had been low on meat for weeks, and several families with young children were counting on him. That was the Apache way. The strong provided for the weak, the skilled shared with those still learning. As he walked deeper into the forest, his boots made barely a whisper against the fallen leaves. For such a large man, Dakota had mastered the art of moving like smoke. His grandfather, Joseph Whitehorse, had spent years teaching him that size meant nothing if you understood balance. "The mountain doesn't announce itself, Dakota," the old man used to say. "It simply is. Be the mountain." The forest was alive with morning sounds. Squirrels chattered in the oak trees, their tails flicking with nervous energy. A hawk circled high above, riding the thermals with ancient patience. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker drummed against dead bark. Searching for insect, Dakota smiled, feeling the familiar peace that only came when he was alone with nature. He had been walking for about an hour when he heard it. A sound that made his blood run cold. It was a low, pained whining, followed by desperate scratching, the sound of an animal in distress. Dakota's heart immediately began to race, not with fear, but with concern. In all his years of hunting, he had never been able to ignore the suffering of any creature. Following the sound, he pushed through a thicket of mountain laurel and found himself in a small clearing. What he saw there made him drop his rifle and rush forward without thinking. Caught in a tangle of rusted barbed wire was the most magnificent wolf he had ever seen. The animal was huge, with thick gray fur that shimmered silver in the morning light. But it was trapped, the cruel wire wrapped around its legs and torso, like the arms of some metal monster. "Oh no, brother," Dakota whispered, his voice heavy with emotion. "What have they done to you?" The wolf heard his voice and immediately began to struggle more violently, its yellow eyes wide with terror. Fresh blood appeared where the barbed wire cut deeper into its flesh. Dakota could see that the animal had been fighting the wire for hours, maybe all night. Its strength was nearly gone. "Easy, easy," Dakota said, slowly lowering himself to his knees about 10 feet away from the trapped wolf. "I'm not going to hurt you. I want to help." The wolf stared at him with intelligent eyes, panting heavily. Dakota could see the internal struggle, the animal's instinct to flee warring with its desperate need for assistance. For several long minutes, man and wolf simply looked at each other across the clearing. Dakota began to sing, very softly, an old Apache healing song his grandfather had taught him. The melody was haunting and gentle, meant to calm both the singer and the listener. As his deep voice carried the ancient words across the clearing, something remarkable happened. The wolf stopped struggling. Its ears, which had been pinned back against its head, slowly came forward. Its breathing became less frantic. "That's it, brother," Takoda whispered between verses. "Let me help you. We are both children of the same earth." Moving very slowly, Takoda began to crawl forward on his hands and knees. The wolf watched his every movement, but didn't try to flee. When he was close enough to touch the wire, Takoda stopped and held out his hand, palm up, so the wolf could catch his scent. The wolf stretched its neck forward and sniffed delicately at Takoda's fingers. For a moment that seemed to last forever, wild yellow eyes stared into gentle brown ones. Then, incredibly, the wolf's tail gave the slightest wag. "We understand each other, don't we?" Takoda said softly. "You know I mean no harm." Working with infinite patience, Takoda began to untangle the barbed wire. It was slow, careful work. Each movement had to be precise to avoid hurting the wolf further. The animal lay perfectly still, as if it understood that cooperation was its only hope for freedom. As Takoda worked, he talked continuously in a soothing voice. He told the wolf about his grandfather, about the old stories, about the belief that all animals were brothers and sisters to the Apache people. The wolf listened to every word, its eyes never leaving Takoda's face. "My grandfather always said that sometimes the spirits send us tests." Takoda murmured as he carefully unwound a particularly stubborn piece of wire from around the wolf's front leg. "Maybe you are my test, brother. Maybe I am yours." It took nearly 2 hours to free the wolf completely. When the last piece of wire fell away, the animal didn't immediately run. Instead, it struggled to its feet, favoring its left rear leg, where the wire had cut deepest. Takoda could see that the wounds needed attention, but he didn't dare try to treat them. He had done enough by freeing the animal. The wolf stood there for a long moment, looking at Takoda with an expression that seemed almost like gratitude. Then it limped toward the edge of the clearing. Just before disappearing into the trees, it stopped and looked back. Their eyes met one more time across the small distance, and Takoda felt something pass between them, some spark of recognition, of connection. "Go well, brother," he whispered. "May the spirits watch over you." The wolf disappeared into the forest, leaving Takoda alone in the clearing with the tangled mass of barbed wire and a heart full of wonder. He had expected never to see the magnificent creature again. How could he have known that this moment was only the beginning of a friendship that would change both their lives forever? As he gathered his rifle and prepared to continue his hunt, Takoda felt different somehow. The forest seemed more alive, more connected. Every bird song sounded like a celebration, every rustle in the underbrush like a whispered conversation. He had freed a wolf, but somehow he felt like the one who had been set loose. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the mist and filling the forest with golden light. Somewhere ahead lay the game he had come to find, the meat that would feed the families on the reservation. But all Takoda could think about was a pair of intelligent yellow eyes, and the feeling that his life had just taken a turn towards something extraordinary. He walked on, unaware that hidden in the trees behind him, the grey wolf had returned to watch him go, its head tilted with curiosity and something that might have been affection. 3 days passed without any sign of the wolf, and Takoda found himself thinking about the encounter constantly. He had successfully completed his hunt that first morning, bringing back 2 deer that would feed several families for weeks. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw those intelligent yellow eyes and wondered how the wounded animal was faring in the wild. On the 4th morning, Takoda decided to return to the clearing where he had freed the wolf. He told himself it was just to clean up the barbed wire. It was dangerous to leave such things in the forest where other animals might get caught. But deep in his heart, he hoped he might find some sign that the wolf was healing well. The walk to the clearing felt different this time, where before he had moved with the focused purpose of a hunter, Now he found himself pausing frequently, listening for sounds that might indicate the wolf's presence. Every snapped twig, every rustle in the bushes made his heart quicken with anticipation. When he reached the clearing, Tekoda was disappointed to find it empty, except for the coiled mass of barbed wire he had removed from the wolf. He spent 20 minutes carefully gathering every piece of the cruel metal, making sure no dangerous fragments remained. As he worked, he found himself talking aloud, as if the wolf might be listening from somewhere in the surrounding trees. "I hope you're healing well, brother," he said to the forest. "I hope you found water and food, and a safe place to rest." Just as he was preparing to leave, a sound made him freeze. It was the soft crack of a branch being stepped on, coming from the edge of the clearing behind him. Tekoda turned slowly, hardly daring to breathe. There, standing at the tree line like a silver ghost, was the wolf. The magnificent creature looked different than it had 3 days ago. The wounds were clearly healing, though Tekoda could see pink scars where the deepest cuts had been. The wolf was still favoring its left rear leg, but it was putting weight on it now. Most remarkably, the animal showed no fear. It simply stood there, watching Tekoda with those remarkable yellow eyes. "Hello again, brother," Tekoda whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I wondered if I would see you again." The wolf took a step into the clearing, then another. It moved with careful deliberation, never taking its eyes off Tekoda. When it was about 15 feet away, it stopped and sat down, wrapping its tail around its feet in a gesture that seemed almost dignified. For several minutes they simply looked at each other. Tekoda could hardly believe what was happening. Wild wolves avoided humans at all costs. This animal should have run the moment it caught his scent. Instead, it seemed to be choosing to be here, choosing to seek him out. "You came back," Tekoda said softly. "But why?" As if in response, the wolf stood and limped closer. When it was just 5 feet away, it lowered its head and pushed something toward Tekoda with its nose. Looking down, Tekoda saw it was a rabbit, freshly killed, still warm. The gesture took Tekoda's breath away. In Apache culture, sharing food was the highest sign of respect and friendship. This wolf was offering him a gift, treating him as an equal, as family. "You brought this for me?" Tekoda asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The wolf sat back and tilted its head, as if waiting for Tekoda to accept the offering. Slowly, carefully, Tekoda reached out and picked up the rabbit. "Thank you, brother. This is a great honor." The wolf's tail wagged once, just slightly, but enough for Tekoda to notice. Then the animal turned and began walking toward the edge of the clearing. After a few steps, it stopped and looked back at Tekoda, as if asking him to follow. Without hesitation, Tekoda gathered his things and followed the wolf into the forest. The animal moved at a pace that accommodated its healing leg, but also seemed mindful that Tekoda, despite his size and grace, was not as naturally suited to moving through dense woodland as a wolf. They walked for nearly an hour, deeper into the mountains than Tekoda usually ventured. The wolf led him along game trails and through hidden passes that Tekoda had never seen before. Several times the animal stopped to wait when Tekoda fell behind, always looking back with what seemed like patience and understanding. Finally, they emerged onto a rocky ledge that offered a breathtaking view of the valley below. The wolf walked to the edge and sat down, gazing out over the landscape. Tekoda joined him, settling his large frame carefully on the sun-warmed stone. "This is your place, isn't it?" Tekoda said quietly. "Your home." The wolf looked at him, and Tekoda could have sworn he saw understanding in those yellow eyes. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching hawks circle far below and listening to the wind whisper through the pine trees. As the sun began to climb toward its noon position, the wolf stood and approached Tekoda. For a moment, the animal hesitated, as if making a decision. Then, with movements so gentle they seemed almost reverent, the wolf stepped forward and touched its nose to Tekoda's hand. The contact lasted only a second, but it sent electricity up Dakota's arm and straight to his heart. This wild creature, this proud and independent spirit, was accepting him. More than that, it was claiming him as a friend. "I understand," Dakota whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "We are brothers now, you and I." The wolf stepped back and looked directly into Dakota's eyes. In that moment, something passed between them that transcended the boundaries between human and animal, between the civilized world and the wild. It was a recognition, a promise, a bond that would tie their fates together. Then the wolf turned and began picking its way down a steep trail that led away from the ledge. At a small plateau about 50 feet below, it stopped and looked back one more time. Dakota raised his hand in farewell, and the wolf's tail wagged once before the animal disappeared into the trees. Dakota sat on the ledge for a long time after the wolf was gone, staring out at the valley and trying to process what had just happened. In his 30 years of life, he had never experienced anything like this. His grandfather had told him stories of the old days, when Apache warriors sometimes formed bonds with wild animals that became their spiritual guides and protectors. But those were stories from another time, another world, or were they? As he finally stood to begin the journey back to his cabin, Dakota felt a profound sense of change settling over him. The wolf had marked him somehow, claimed him as part of its world, and Dakota knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. He made his way carefully down from the ledge, following the same hidden trails the wolf had shown him. But now the paths seemed familiar, as if they had always been part of his mental map of the forest. The wolf had shared more than just a view from the mountain top. It had shared knowledge, territory, trust. That night, as Dakota sat by his fire preparing the rabbit the wolf had given him, he found himself looking frequently toward the forest. Somewhere out there, his new brother was settling down for the night, probably on that same rocky ledge. The thought filled Dakota with a warmth that had nothing to do with the flames dancing before him. Tomorrow, he decided, he would return to the clearing, not to hunt, not to work, but simply to see if the wolf would come again. Something told him it would. As if summoned by his thoughts, a long, haunting howl echoed across the valley. It was answered by another, then another, until the night was filled with the wild music of wolves calling to each other across the darkness. But one voice rose above the rest, deeper, stronger, more musical than the others. Dakota smiled, recognizing the call of his brother. "Good night, my friend," he whispered to the forest. "Until tomorrow." The howling continued long into the night, a lullaby of the wild that carried Dakota into the most peaceful sleep he had experienced in years. And in his dreams, he ran through moonlit forests on 4 legs instead of 2, free and wild and home. Over the next 2 weeks, Dakota's life fell into a rhythm he had never imagined possible. Every morning, he would make his way to the clearing where he had first freed the wolf, and every morning, without fail, the magnificent gray animal would be waiting for him. The wolf had begun arriving before dawn, Dakota discovered, because on the 3rd day of their meetings, he had decided to come earlier and found the animal already there, sitting patiently in the center of the clearing like a silver statue in the pre-dawn gloom. "How long have you been waiting, brother?" Dakota had asked that morning, and the wolf had tilted its head and wagged its tail once, as if to say it didn't matter. They had developed a routine together. First, they would sit quietly while the forest woke up around them, sharing the peaceful silence of early morning. Then the wolf would lead Dakota on long walks through hidden parts of the mountains, showing him places no human had probably ever seen. Secret waterfalls tucked away in narrow canyons, meadows filled with wildflowers that bloomed in impossible colors, ancient trees that had stood since before the first Apache had walked these lands. During these walks, Dakota found himself talking constantly. He told the wolf about his childhood, about learning to hunt and track from his grandfather. He shared stories of the reservation, of the families he provided for, of the loneliness that had always been his companion, until now. The wolf listened to everything, its intelligent eyes never leaving Dakota's face, occasionally offering soft whines or rumbling sounds that seemed like responses. "You know, I never named you," Dakota said on the morning of their 14th meeting. They were sitting beside a crystal-clear stream, watching trout dart through the shallow water. "My grandfather always said that names have power. They shape who we become." The wolf looked at him attentively, as if understanding the importance of the moment. "I think I'll call you Maska," Dakota continued. "It means strong in Apache. You are the strongest creature I've ever met, not just in body, but in spirit. You survived that barbed wire you chose to trust when you could have fled. That takes a strength most beings never find." The wolf Maska seemed to consider this for a moment. Then he stood and walked to the stream's edge, where he bent his great head to drink. When he lifted his muzzle, water dripping from his whiskers, he looked directly at Dakota and let out a low rumbling sound that seemed like approval. "Maska it is then," Dakota laughed, and the wolf's tail wagged enthusiastically. Their friendship was changing Dakota in ways he hadn't expected. He found himself more aware of everything around him, the shift in wind patterns that meant rain was coming, the subtle signs that indicated which animals had passed through an area, the complex network of relationships that connected every living thing in the forest. It was as if Maska was teaching him to see the world through wild eyes, to understand the forest not as an outsider, but as a participant in its ancient rhythms. The people on the reservation began to notice changes in Dakota as well. Maria Sandoval, who ran the small trading post, commented that he seemed happier, more at peace with himself. "You're different, Dakota," she told him one afternoon when he came in for supplies. "You used to carry sadness like a heavy pack. Now you move like the weight is gone." Dakota just smiled and said he had been spending more time in the forest, which was true enough. He hadn't told anyone about Maska. Something told him that this friendship was too precious, too unlikely to share with others who might not understand. But the changes went beyond just his mood. Dakota found that his tracking skills had improved dramatically. He could now read signs in the forest that would have been invisible to him before. His hunting became so efficient that he was able to provide meat for twice as many families with half the effort. It was as if Maska was somehow sharing the wolf's natural instincts with him. On the 20th day of their friendship, something extraordinary happened. Dakota arrived at the clearing to find Maska waiting as usual, but this time the wolf was not alone. Standing slightly behind him, partially hidden in the shadows, was another wolf, smaller, with darker fur and bright amber eyes. "Who's your friend, Maska?" Dakota asked softly, not wanting to frighten the newcomer. Maska looked back at the other wolf, then at Dakota, as if making introductions. The second wolf took a hesitant step forward, clearly nervous, but trusting Maska's judgment. "Hello, sister," Dakota said gently, recognizing the feminine features of the smaller wolf. "Are you Maska's mate?" As if understanding the question, the female wolf moved to stand beside Maska, pressing her shoulder against his. The message was clear. They were together, a bonded pair. "What's her name going to be?" Dakota asked Maska, who tilted his head as if considering. The female wolf was beautiful, with intelligent eyes and a grace that spoke of both strength and gentleness. As Dakota watched her move, a name came to him naturally. "Iana," he said aloud. "It means eternal blossom in our language. She moves like something that will bloom forever." The female wolf, Iana, looked at him when he spoke her name, and her tail gave a small, cautious wag. It was clear she was willing to accept Dakota, because Maska did, but she would need time to develop her own trust. Over the next week, Iana slowly warmed to Dakota's presence. She never approached him as boldly as Maska did, but she stopped hiding when he arrived and began joining their long walks through the forest. Dakota found himself fascinated by the dynamics between the wolf pair, the subtle ways they communicated, how they took turns leading and following, the obvious affection they showed each other. "You two remind me of the old stories," he told them one morning as they rested beside a mountain lake. "My grandfather used to say that true partnerships were rare gifts from the spirits. Most creatures spend their whole lives searching for their other half." Maska and Ayana were lying close together, and as Tikoda spoke, the male wolf lifted his great head and looked at him with an expression that seemed almost sympathetic. It was as if the animal understood that Tikoda had never found his own mate, had never experienced the kind of bond the two wolves shared. "Don't worry about me, brother," Tikoda said, reading the compassion in Maska's eyes. "I have you two now. That's more family than I've had in years." But even as he said it, Tikoda felt a pang of loneliness that his friendship with the wolves, wonderful as it was, couldn't entirely fill. At 30 years old, he had never found a woman who could understand his deep connection to the old ways, his need for solitude in the forest, his gentle nature that contrasted so sharply with his intimidating size. Most people saw his physical presence and made assumptions about who he was inside. That evening, as Tikoda sat by his fire preparing dinner, he found himself thinking about family and connection in ways he never had before. Watching Maska and Ayana together had awakened something in him, a longing for companionship that went beyond friendship, for someone to share not just adventures, but quiet moments, daily routines, the simple pleasure of not being alone. A howl in the distance interrupted his thoughts, but this wasn't the familiar call of his wolf friends. This howl carried distress, panic, fear. Tikoda was on his feet, instantly, his heart racing. Something was wrong. The howling came again, closer now, and this time Tikoda recognized Ayana's voice. She was calling for help, and the desperation in her cry made his blood run cold. Without thinking, Tikoda grabbed his rifle and plunged into the dark forest, following the sound of Ayana's increasingly frantic calls. Branches tore at his clothes and face as he ran, but he didn't slow down. His friends were in danger, and nothing else mattered. As he crashed through the underbrush, guided by instinct and the wolf's continued howling, Tikoda couldn't shake the feeling that their peaceful world was about to be shattered forever. The howling stopped suddenly, and the silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the cries had been. "I'm coming," Tikoda whispered to the darkness. "Hold on, I'm coming." Tikoda ran through the darkness like a man possessed, his massive frame crashing through undergrowth that would have stopped a smaller person. The silence that had replaced Ayana's desperate howling felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. Every second that passed without hearing from his friends filled him with greater dread. Following his instincts and the faint scent trail that his time with the wolves had taught him to recognize, Tikoda made his way toward the rocky ledge where Maska had first brought him. It was their special place, their sanctuary, and something told him that's where he would find them. As he climbed the steep trail leading to the ledge, Tikoda heard voices, human voices, drifting down from above. His blood turned to ice as he recognized the harsh, mocking tones of men who viewed the forest not as a living entity deserving respect, but as something to be conquered and exploited. "Look at the size of that male," one voice said with cruel excitement. "His pelt alone will bring $500. Easy. The female's smaller, but that fur is prime," another voice responded. "We hit the jackpot tonight, boys." Tikoda's hands tightened around his rifle as he continued climbing, now moving with the silent stealth Maska had helped him perfect. As he neared the top of the ledge, he could see the glow of flashlights and hear more clearly the conversation that made his heart break with rage. "How'd you know they'd be here?" a third voice asked. "Been tracking this pack for weeks," the first man replied. "Big male like that doesn't just disappear. They got a routine, a territory, just had to be patient. Good thing we brought the tranquilizer gun. Lot easier than trying to shoot them in the dark with regular ammunition." Tikoda reached the edge of the clearing and peered through the rocks. What he saw there would haunt him for the rest of his life. Masker lay motionless on his side, his magnificent body unnaturally still. Several feet away, Ayana was struggling weakly against the effects of whatever drug they had used on her, her legs unable to support her weight. Three men stood over the wolves, their faces illuminated by powerful flashlights. They were dressed in expensive hunting gear and carried equipment that spoke of serious money and serious intent. These weren't local poachers looking for a quick meal. These were professional wolf hunters, the kind who killed for profit and pleasure. "How long before the drugs wear off?" the youngest of the three asked nervously. "Hour, maybe two," the leader replied. "Plenty of time to get them loaded in the truck and back to town. Johnson's already got buyers lined up in Colorado. Rich folks pay good money for wolf pelts, especially ones this size. What if someone comes looking for them? Who's gonna? We're 50 miles from the nearest town, and nobody comes up here except maybe some old Indian from the reservation. Even if someone finds the bodies after we take the pelts, they'll figure it was natural causes, or maybe a bear attack." Dakota felt a rage building in his chest, unlike anything he had ever experienced. These men had violated his sacred place, threatened his family, reduced his noble friends to nothing more than dollar signs. His finger tightened on the trigger of his rifle, and for a moment he seriously considered shooting all three of them where they stood. But his grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "Violence should always be the last choice, Dakota. A wise man finds other ways to protect what he loves." Taking a deep breath, Dakota stood up and stepped into the light, his rifle held ready but not yet aimed at the intruders. "Good evening, gentlemen," he said in a voice so deep and calm it seemed to come from the mountain itself. "Beautiful night for a walk, isn't it?" The three men spun around, their flashlights swinging toward him. When the beams illuminated Dakota's full height and massive build, all three took an involuntary step backward. "Jesus Christ," one of them whispered. "Look at the size of him." "Who the hell are you?" the leader demanded, trying to recover his composure. "This is public land. You got no right to sneak up on people like that." "My name is Dakota Whitehorse," he replied, taking a slow step forward. "And you're on sacred Apache land. These mountains have been protected by my people for over 1,000 years. Bullshit," the leader spat. But Dakota could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "This ain't reservation land. We checked the maps drawn by white men who never bothered to ask the people who lived here first," Dakota said, taking another step closer. In the flashlight beams, he looked like some primordial force of nature, huge, implacable, and utterly unafraid. "But I'm not here to discuss property rights. I'm here about those wolves." "What about them?" the youngest hunter asked nervously. "They're my friends," Dakota said simply, "and you've hurt them." The three men exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to handle this unexpected development. The leader tried to reassert his authority. "Look, Chief, we got permits to hunt wolves. It's all legal and above board. These animals are dangerous predators, and we're doing a public service by removing them." "Permits?" Dakota's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. "From who?" "State Wildlife Department," the man replied, and he wouldn't meet Dakota's eyes. "Interesting," Dakota said, "because I happen to know that New Mexico has had a moratorium on wolf hunting since 1980. In fact, these animals are protected under federal law. So either you have some very special permits, or you're lying." The silence that followed was broken only by Ayana's weak whimpering as she tried to lift her head. The sound cut through Dakota like a knife, and his voice hardened. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, finally raising his rifle to point directly at the leader's chest. "You're going to pack up your equipment and leave this place. You're going to drive back to whatever hole you crawled out of, and you're never going to return to these mountains. If I ever see you here again, or if I hear of wolves being killed anywhere in this region, I will find you. And when I do, you'll discover that some problems can't be solved with tranquilizer guns and flashlights." "You can't threaten us," the leader blustered, but his voice shook. "There's three of us, and one of you, and you can't watch these mountains forever." Takoda smiled, and in the harsh light of their flashlights, his expression was absolutely terrifying. "You're right," he said. "There are three of you, three soft, out-of-shape city men, with fancy equipment and no understanding of how to survive in these mountains. And there's one of me, a man who knows every trail, every cave, every hiding place within 100 miles. A man who can track you by scent alone, who can move through these forests without making a sound, who can survive for weeks with nothing but what the land provides." He paused, letting that sink in. "But more importantly, you seem to think I'm alone up here. Let me tell you something about wolves, gentlemen. They don't travel in pairs, they travel in packs." As if summoned by his words, a low growling began to emanate from the darkness around the ledge. First one voice, then another, then several more, until the night was filled with the menacing sounds of wolves surrounding the clearing. The three hunters spun around frantically, their flashlight beams dancing across the rocks, but revealing nothing but shadows and gleaming eyes. "That's impossible," the leader whispered. "We only saw 2 wolves." "You saw 2 wolves," Takoda corrected. "The ones who trusted humans enough to let you get close. But Maska and Ayana are part of a larger family, and that family doesn't appreciate strangers threatening their members." The growling grew louder, closer. Takoda could see the terror in the hunters' eyes as they realized how completely the situation had turned against them. "Please," the youngest one said, his voice cracking. "We'll leave. We'll go right now and never come back." "Smart boy," Takoda said. "But first, you're going to help me with something." He gestured toward the motionless forms of Maska and Ayana. "Those drugs you used, what are they and how do I counteract them?" "Ketamine-based tranquilizer," the leader said reluctantly. "It'll wear off naturally in an hour or 2. There's no antidote." "And you're sure it won't cause permanent damage?" "It's safe," the man assured him quickly. "We use it all the time. No side effects." Takoda studied his face carefully, using instincts sharpened by years of reading both animals and men. "You're telling the truth," he concluded. "Good, because if either of these wolves dies tonight, I'll hold all 3 of you responsible, and my justice won't be as gentle as the law's." The growling from the darkness intensified, as if the unseen wolves were emphasizing Takoda's threat. "Now go," he said, stepping aside. "Take your equipment and get out of my mountains, and remember, I'll know if you're ever back. The wolves will tell me." The 3 hunters didn't need to be told twice. They grabbed their gear with frantic haste and stumbled toward the trail that led down from the ledge. As they disappeared into the darkness, Takoda called after them. "Drive carefully, gentlemen. These mountain roads can be very dangerous at night, especially for people who don't know them well." Their footsteps faded into the distance, and gradually the growling from the darkness subsided. Takoda knew the truth. There had been no pack of wolves surrounding the clearing. The sounds had come from his own throat, a trick his grandfather had taught him years ago for communicating with animals and intimidating enemies. But the hunters didn't need to know that. He set down his rifle and knelt beside Maska's still form, placing a gentle hand on the wolf's massive flank. He could feel the steady rhythm of breathing, the strong heartbeat that meant his friend would recover. "I'm here, brother," he whispered. "You're safe now. Both of you are safe." Ayana managed to lift her head slightly and looked at him with grateful eyes. Her tail moved weakly against the ground, barely a wag, but enough to tell him she recognized him. Takoda settled himself between the 2 wolves to wait for the drugs to wear off, his rifle across his knees and his eyes constantly scanning the darkness for any sign of the hunter's return. He had won this battle, but something told him the war was far from over. As he sat there in the darkness, protecting his unconscious friends, Takoda realized that everything had changed tonight. The peaceful world he had built with Maska and Ayana was gone forever, shattered by men who saw only profit where he saw family. But he also realized something else. He'd do anything, face any danger, overcome any obstacle to protect these creatures who had brought such joy into his life. They weren't just animals to him anymore. They were family, and family was worth fighting for. It took 3 hours for Maska and Ayana to fully recover from the tranquilizers. Takoda sat with them through the entire ordeal, watching anxiously as they gradually regained consciousness and mobility. When Maska finally struggled to his feet and nuzzled Takoda's hand in gratitude, the big Apache man felt tears of relief streaming down his face. "I thought I'd lost you both," he whispered, wrapping his arms around Maska's thick neck. The wolf tolerated the embrace, even leaning into it slightly, as if understanding how frightened his human friend had been. Ayana was slower to recover, but eventually she too managed to stand, though she remained unsteady on her legs. She approached Takoda cautiously and, for the first time since he had met her, touched her nose to his hand in a gesture of trust and thanks. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Takoda helped his friends make their way down from the ledge to a more sheltered location. He knew they couldn't return to their old routines now. The hunters might come back with reinforcements, or other wolf killers might hear about the pack and come looking for them. "We need to find you both a safer place," Takoda said as they reached a small clearing surrounded by dense forest. "Somewhere those men will never think to look." But even as he said it, Takoda's heart was breaking. He knew what this meant. Their daily meetings would have to end. The peaceful mornings in the clearing, the long walks through hidden trails, the simple joy of sharing space with creatures who accepted him completely, all of that was now too dangerous to continue. Maska seemed to sense his distress. The great wolf approached and sat directly in front of Takoda, fixing him with those intelligent yellow eyes. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, and Takoda felt that familiar sense of communication that transcended words. "You understand, don't you?" Takoda asked softly. "You know we can't keep meeting like this. It's too risky for you both." Maska tilted his head, then did something that surprised Takoda completely. The wolf stood and began walking deeper into the forest, looking back over his shoulder as if asking Takoda to follow. "Where are you going, brother?" But Maska just continued walking, with Ayana falling into step beside him. After a moment's hesitation, Takoda gathered his rifle and followed them into the unknown depths of the forest. They walked for over 2 hours, through terrain that became increasingly wild and remote. Takoda, despite his extensive knowledge of these mountains, found himself in areas he had never seen before. The paths they followed were ancient animal trails, hidden valleys that seemed untouched by human presence, places where the forest felt primeval and sacred. Finally, Maska led them to what appeared to be a dead end, a sheer rock wall rising nearly 100 feet into the air. But as they approached, Takoda realized that what looked like solid stone was actually an optical illusion. There was a narrow crack in the rock face, barely wide enough for a large man to squeeze through. Maska disappeared into the crack without hesitation, followed by Ayana. Takoda studied the opening dubiously, then decided to trust his friend's judgment. Turning sideways and breathing in deeply, he managed to squeeze his massive frame through the rocky passage. What he found on the other side took his breath away. They had emerged into a hidden canyon, completely enclosed by towering rock walls. A crystal-clear stream ran through the center, fed by a waterfall that cascaded down from an opening high above. The canyon was perhaps 200 yards long and half as wide, filled with lush grass and wildflowers. Ancient trees provided shade and shelter, and the whole place felt like something from a dream. "My God," Takoda whispered, turning slowly to take in the incredible sight. "How did you find this place?" Maska approached him and gently bumped his massive head against Takoda's chest, as if say, "This is our gift to you, our secret place." As Takoda explored the canyon, he realized it was perfect, in ways that seemed almost supernatural. The entrance was virtually invisible from the outside. Someone could pass within 10 feet of it and never know it was there. The canyon provided everything the wolves would need: fresh water, abundant game, shelter from weather, and complete protection from human intrusion. But there was something else about the place that made Tekoda's skin tingle with recognition. Scattered throughout the canyon were signs of ancient human habitation, fire rings made from carefully arranged stones, crude pictographs painted on the rock walls, burial cairns that marked this as sacred ground. This was an Apache sanctuary, he said aloud, his voice filled with awe. Our people knew about this place centuries ago. He approached one of the rock walls where the pictographs were clearest. Among the painted figures of hunters and animals, he found something that made his heart race. There, depicted in ochre and charcoal, was the unmistakable figure of a large man standing beside a wolf. The two figures were touching, their painted hands and paws overlapping in a gesture of friendship and partnership. It's happened before, Tekoda breathed, understanding flooding through him. This connection between our people and your people, it's not new, it's ancient. Ayana approached and sat beside him as he studied the pictographs. Her amber eyes seemed to reflect an understanding that went beyond simple animal intelligence, as if she too recognized the significance of what they had found. Over the next several hours, Tekoda explored every inch of the canyon with his friend. He found caves that would provide shelter during bad weather, areas where the wolves could hunt small game, and hidden pools perfect for drinking and cooling off during hot days. Most importantly, he found evidence that this place had served as a refuge for both humans and animals for thousands of years. You'll be safe here, he told Maska and Ayana as the sun began to set. No one will find you and you'll have everything you need to live well. But even as he spoke the words, Tekoda felt his heart breaking. This magical place represented safety for his friends, but it also meant goodbye. He couldn't expect them to leave their perfect sanctuary just to spend time with him, and he couldn't risk leading danger to their hideaway by visiting too often. Maska seemed to sense his sadness. The great wolf approached, and with unusual boldness, placed his front paws on Tekoda's shoulders, bringing them face to face. For a long moment, they looked into each other's eyes, sharing a communication deeper than words. Then Maska did something extraordinary. He threw back his head and released a long musical howl that echoed off the canyon walls and seemed to fill the entire hidden valley with sound. It was not a call of distress or territory marking, it was something else entirely. A song of friendship, of gratitude, of connection that would transcend physical separation. When the echoes faded, Ayana added her voice to the evening air, her howl higher and more melodious than her mates, but equally beautiful. Together, their voices created a harmony that seemed to touch something ancient and sacred in the hidden canyon. Without really understanding why, Tekoda found himself joining in. Using the wolf voice techniques his grandfather had taught him, he added his own call to theirs, creating a three-part harmony that seemed to make the very stones ring with music. They sang together until the stars came out, their voices blending in ways that seemed impossible between species. And in that music, Tekoda found his answer. Physical separation might be necessary for safety, but the bond they had forged could not be broken by distance or danger. I understand, he said when their song finally ended. This isn't goodbye, this is just different. We're still family no matter how far apart we have to be. Maska and Ayana both approached him then, and for the first time since he had known them, both wolves allowed him to embrace them simultaneously. Tekoda found himself sandwiched between two magnificent creatures who had changed his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. I'll come back when I can, he promised them. Not often, because I won't risk bringing danger here. But sometimes when the moon is dark and I'm certain no one has followed me, I'll come back and we'll sing together again. As he prepared to leave the canyon, squeezing back through the narrow entrance into the normal world, Tekoda carried with him the image of Maska and Ayana, standing side by side in their perfect sanctuary. They would be safe here, happy here, free to live as wolves were meant to live. The journey back to his cabin took most of the night, and as Tekoda walked through the familiar forest, he realized that everything had changed again. The desperate urgency of the previous night had given way to something deeper, a sense of purpose and responsibility that he had never felt before. He had found his calling in protecting these magnificent creatures, and somewhere in that hidden canyon, protected by ancient spirits and surrounded by walls of stone, his family was safe. But Takoda also knew that the hunters would not give up easily. Men like that didn't accept defeat gracefully, and they would probably return with better planning and more determination. When that happened, Takoda would be ready for them. As he reached his cabin and settled down for what remained of the night, Takoda began making plans. He would need to scout the area more thoroughly, learn the patterns of anyone who might a threat to the wolves, and prepare defenses that didn't rely on bluff and intimidation. The war for the safety of his friends had only just begun. 3 weeks passed in deceptive peace. Takoda maintained his normal routines, hunting for the families on the reservation and tending to his daily needs, but his eyes constantly scanned the forest for signs of the hunters' return. Twice during the dark of the moon, he made the treacherous journey to the hidden canyon to check on Maska and Ayana. Both times he found them thriving in their sanctuary, and their joyful greetings filled his heart with warmth. But on a cold morning in late October, Takoda's worst fears were confirmed. He was returning from an early hunting trip when he spotted fresh tire tracks on one of the old logging roads that led into the mountains. The tracks were from heavy vehicles, trucks capable of carrying equipment and multiple people. Following the tracks carefully, staying well hidden in the tree line, Takoda discovered a temporary camp about 5 miles from his cabin. There were 3 large trucks, sophisticated camping equipment, and at least 8 men moving around the site. These weren't the same amateur hunters from before. This was a professional operation with serious resources. Takoda spent the entire day observing the camp from concealment, learning their patterns and listening to their conversations. What he heard made his blood run cold. Johnson's offering 10,000 for the big male, 15 if we take him alive, the apparent leader was saying to his men. The female's worth 5,000 either way. But it's the breeding pair aspect that makes them so valuable. Collectors pay premium prices for mated wolves. What about the Indian who ran us off before? One of the men asked. That's why we brought extra firepower this time, the leader replied, patting a high-powered rifle with a scope. Mountain Man thinks he's tough, but he's just one guy. We've got 8 men and enough equipment to handle any surprises. You sure he won't call in reinforcements from the reservation? Who's he gonna call? Tribal police don't have jurisdiction out here, and the sheriff's department is 2 hours away. By the time anyone responds to anything, we'll be long gone with our prize. Takoda felt sick as he listened to them discuss his friends as if they were merchandise. These men had no understanding of what Maska and Ayana represented, the intelligence, the loyalty, the deep capacity for love and friendship that made them so much more than simple animals. Over the next 2 days, Takoda watched the hunters methodically search the forest, following what remained of the old scent trails that led toward the canyon. They were good at their job, experienced trackers who knew how to read sign and follow even faint traces. It was only a matter of time before they found the hidden entrance. On the 3rd night, Takoda made a desperate decision. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to warn Maska and Ayana and somehow get them to safety before the hunters closed in. Under cover of complete darkness, he made his way through the forest toward the canyon, moving with all the stealth his Apache heritage and wolf-taught skills had given him. He was halfway to the canyon when disaster struck. A rifle shot cracked through the night air, followed immediately by a howl of pain that Takoda recognized with horror. It was Maska's voice, filled with agony and fear. More shots followed, along with shouting voices and the sound of heavy boots crashing through the underbrush. "We got him. The big one's down. Where's the female? She's got to be around here somewhere. Keep searching. She can't have gone far." Takoda ran toward the sounds with complete abandon, no longer caring about stealth or personal safety. His friends were in danger, and nothing else mattered. Branches tore at his face and clothes as he crashed through the forest, his heart pounding with terror and rage. He reached a clearing just in time to see the most devastating sight of his life. Maska lay motionless on the ground, his magnificent grey coat stained dark with blood. 3 hunters stood over him with flashlights while others searched the surrounding area for Ayana. "Is he dead?" one of them asked. "Not yet, but close," the leader replied, nudging Maska's still form with his boot. Caught him right in the chest. "Few more minutes and we won't need to worry about him fighting back when we load him in the truck." Something broke inside Takoda at those words. This gentle giant who had shown him friendship and trust, who had shared the secrets of the forest and the gift of unconditional acceptance, was dying because of human greed and cruelty. The rage that filled him was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was the fury of a protective father, a loyal brother, a guardian who had failed in his most sacred duty. "Get away from him!" Takoda's roar echoed through the forest as he burst into the clearing, his rifle raised and ready. The hunters spun toward him, momentarily blinded by their own flashlights. "It's the Indian," someone shouted. "Take him down." Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, but Takoda was already moving, using every skill his grandfather had taught him about combat and survival. He rolled behind a fallen log as bullets whined overhead, then came up firing with deadly precision. His first shot took down the hunter closest to Maska. His second sent another man diving for cover behind a tree. The clearing became a chaos of muzzle flashes, shouting voices, and ricocheting bullets. But Takoda was outnumbered and outgunned. Even his superior knowledge of the terrain couldn't overcome 8 armed men with sophisticated equipment. A burning pain tore through his left shoulder as a bullet found its mark, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the ground. As he struggled to regain his footing, Takoda saw more hunters emerging from the forest. They had him surrounded, their rifle barrels all pointed at his chest. The leader stepped forward with a triumphant grin. "Drop the weapon, Chief," he commanded. "You're done." Takoda looked around at the circle of armed men, then down at Maska's motionless form. Blood was spreading in a dark pool beneath the wolf's body, and his breathing was so shallow it was barely visible. Ayana was nowhere to be seen. Hopefully she had escaped deeper into the forest, where these men couldn't follow. "You killed him," Takoda said quietly, his voice heavy with grief and rage. "Not yet," the leader replied. "But we will, right after we deal with you. See, you caused us a lot of trouble, and that's going to cost extra. Can't have word getting out that some Indian scared off professional hunters. Bad for business." Takoda slowly placed his rifle on the ground, but his eyes never left Maska's still form. As he knelt there in defeat, something miraculous happened. The wolf's eyes opened, just slightly, and looked directly at him. There was pain in those yellow depths, but also something else, a message, a final communication between friends who had shared something beyond the normal boundaries of species. "Take care of her," those eyes seemed to say. "Protect our family." And then, with effort that must have cost him everything he had left, Maska lifted his great head just a few inches and released one final howl. It was weak, barely audible, but it carried across the forest like a whispered song of love and farewell. The sound broke Takoda's heart completely. Tears streamed down his face as he watched his friend's head sink back to the ground for the last time. Maska's eyes closed, his breathing stopped, and the magnificent spirit that had brought so much joy and wonder into Takoda's life slipped away into whatever realm awaited noble soul. "Touching," the leader sneered. "Real touching. Now about you." He raised his rifle to point directly at Takoda's head, but before he could pull the trigger, a sound erupted from the darkness that made every man in the clearing freeze with terror. It was Ayana, howling with a grief and rage that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Her cry was answered by other voices, distant at first, then closer, then all around them as what sounded like an entire pack of wolves surrounded the clearing. "That's impossible," one of the hunters whispered. "There ain't supposed to be a whole pack up here." But the howling continued, coming from every direction until the night was filled with the voices of what sounded like dozens of wolves calling for vengeance. The hunters spun around frantically, their flashlight beams revealing nothing but shadows and gleaming eyes. In the confusion, Takoda saw his chance. Despite his wounded shoulder, he lunged forward and tackled the leader, sending both men crashing to the ground. The rifle flew from the man's hands as they rolled across the forest floor, fighting desperately in the darkness. The other hunters were too panicked by the surrounding wolf voices to help their leader. They fired blindly into the forest, their muzzle flashes lighting up the clearing like deadly fireworks. But their shots found nothing but trees and rocks. The wolves, if there really were any, remained hidden in the impenetrable darkness. Takoda managed to pin the leader and was reaching for the fallen rifle when pain exploded through his back. Another hunter had gotten behind him and struck him with a heavy flashlight. As Takoda rolled away, gasping for breath, he saw the leader scrambling for his weapon. Enough of this, the man snarled, raising the rifle toward Takoda's chest. "You've caused enough trouble, Indian." Time to... His words were cut off by a streak of silver and gray that came flying out of the darkness. Ayana, driven by grief and protective fury, launched herself at the leader with all the power and rage of a mother wolf, defending her family. Her jaws clamped around the man's throat before he could scream, and they both went down in a tangle of limbs and fur. The other hunters opened fire immediately, but in the darkness and confusion, they were as likely to hit their own leader as the wolf. Ayana released the man and disappeared back into the forest before they could get a clear shot. "Johnson's down," someone screamed. The wolf got Johnson. Panic spread through the remaining hunters like wildfire. These were men accustomed to hunting animals that ran from humans, not creatures that fought back with intelligence and coordinated attacks. The constant howling from the surrounding darkness, the unexpected resistance from both the Indian and the wolves, and the loss of their leader had completely shattered their confidence. "We're getting out of here," one of them shouted. "This place is cursed. What about the dead wolf?" "Leave it. Just grab Johnson and let's go." Takoda watched through a haze of pain as the hunters dragged their wounded leader toward the edge of the clearing. He tried to pursue them, but his injuries were too severe. Blood loss and exhaustion were taking their toll, and darkness was creeping in around the edges of his vision. As the sounds of the hunters' retreat faded into the distance, the forest fell silent. The mysterious pack voices that had surrounded the clearing were gone, leaving only the natural nighttime sounds of wind through trees and distant water flowing over stones. Ayana emerged from the shadows and approached Takoda slowly. Her gray fur was matted with blood, some of it her own from minor wounds, but most of it belonging to the man she had attacked. Her amber eyes reflected a grief so profound it seemed to physically hurt to look at. "I'm sorry," Takoda whispered, as she came close. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save him." Ayana reached him and gently touched her nose to his face, as if to say, "You tried. You risked everything for us. That's what family does." Then she walked over to where Maska lay still and motionless in the growing pool of his own blood. Ayana lay down beside her mate, pressing her body against his cooling form, and began to sing, a low, mournful howl that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. It was a death song, Takoda realized. A farewell lament for a spirit departing this world, and as her voice rose and fell in the ancient melody of grief, Takoda felt his own heart breaking all over again. He had found family in the most unlikely place, had experienced a bond that transcended every boundary between human and animal. But now that family was shattered, that bond tested by violence and loss. As consciousness finally slipped away from him, Takoda's last sight was of Ayana keeping vigil over her fallen mate, her song of sorrow carrying across the mountains like a prayer for the dead. The gentle giant who had brought magic into both their lives was gone forever. Takoda awoke to sunlight filtering through pine branches and the gentle sound of water trickling over stones. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was, or why his entire body felt like it had been torn apart and put back together wrong. Then the memories came flooding back. The gunfire, Masca's death, Ayana's grief-stricken howl, and he squeezed his eyes shut against tears that threatened to overflow. He was lying on soft pine needles beside the stream that ran through the hidden canyon. Somehow, despite his injuries, he had made it back to the sanctuary. Or perhaps Ayana had guided him here. He had vague memories of silver fur beside him during a nightmarish journey through dark forest, of gentle encouragement when he wanted to give up and lie down forever. Sitting up slowly, wincing at the pain in his shoulder and back, Takoda looked around the peaceful canyon. The morning sun painted everything in shades of gold and green, and the waterfall sang its eternal song as it cascaded down the rock walls. It should have been beautiful, but all Takoda could feel was the emptiness where Masca's presence used to be. A soft whine drew his attention to the other side of the stream. Ayana was lying beneath one of the ancient trees, but she looked nothing like the magnificent wolf he had known. Her fur was dull and unkempt, her eyes hollow with grief. She had clearly not eaten in days, and her body seemed to have physically shrunk with sorrow. "Oh, sister," Takoda whispered, his heart breaking all over again. "You're dying of grief." He struggled to his feet and made his way carefully across the stream to where she lay. As he approached, Ayana lifted her head slightly but made no move to rise. She simply looked at him with eyes that held a pain deeper than any physical wound. Takoda knelt beside her and gently placed his hand on her head, feeling the tremor that ran through her weakened body. She was giving up, he realized. Without Masca, she had lost the will to live. "I understand," he said softly, his voice thick with tears. "I know how much you loved him. I loved him too, but he wouldn't want this for you, Ayana. He would want you to be strong, to survive, to honor his memory by living fully." The wolf's eyes closed, and for a moment Takoda thought she might be slipping away right there in his arms. But then she opened them again and looked directly at him with an expression that seemed to ask a question. "What's the point of surviving when your heart has been ripped out?" "The point," Takoda did, as if he had heard her unspoken words, "is that love doesn't die just because the one we love is gone. The point is that Masca's spirit lives on in us, in the memories we carry, in the way he changed us for the better." He was quiet for a long moment, stroking her fur gently while he gathered his thoughts. "Let me tell you something my grandfather taught me when I was young," he continued. "He said that the spirits of those we love never truly leave us. They become part of the wind that rustles through the trees, part of the water that flows over the stones, part of the stars that guide us through dark nights. Masca isn't gone, sister. He's just everywhere now." As if summoned by his words, a gentle breeze stirred through the canyon, ruffling both Takoda's hair and Ayana's fur. For just a moment it carried a scent that seemed familiar, wild and free and full of love. Ayana's ears perked up slightly, and she lifted her head to test the air. Her tail moved once against the ground, barely a twitch, but enough to give Takoda hope. "You felt that too, didn't you?" he asked gently. "He's still with us, Ayana. He always will be." Over the next several days, Takoda slowly nursed both himself and Ayana back to health. His wounds were serious but not life-threatening, and with rest and the healing herbs his grandfather had taught him to recognize, he began to recover his strength. Ayana was a greater challenge. Her wounds were emotional rather than physical, and those take much longer to heal. But gradually, with patient love and constant encouragement, Takoda helped her find reasons to keep living. He brought her fresh water when she wouldn't get up to drink. He caught fish from the stream and cooked them over small fires, sharing his meals with her until she began eating again. Most importantly, he talked to her constantly, sharing memories of Masca, telling stories of their adventures together, keeping the wolf spirit alive through words and love. "Remember that first day when he brought me the rabbit?" Takoda said one evening as they sat together watching the sunset paint the canyon walls. "I thought it was the most generous gift anyone had ever given me. But now I realize the real gift wasn't the rabbit. It was his trust, his friendship, his willingness to see me as family instead of just another human." Ayana's tail wagged slightly at the memory, and Takoda felt a surge of hope. She was coming back to life, slowly but surely. 2 weeks after the terrible night in the forest, something remarkable happened. Takoda was gathering firewood near the canyon entrance when he heard Ayana howl for the first time since Maska's death. But this wasn't a cry of grief. It was something different. Puzzled, he dropped his wood and hurried toward the sound. He found Ayana standing at the center of the canyon, her head raised to the sky, singing a song that seemed to shimmer with joy and wonder. As Takoda watched, she lowered her head and looked directly at him, her amber eyes bright with an excitement he hadn't seen in weeks. "What is it, sister?" he asked, approaching her carefully. "What's got you so?" His words died in his throat as he saw what Ayana had discovered. There, nestled in a shallow depression beneath one of the ancient trees, were 4 tiny forms covered in dark gray fur. Newborn wolf pups, so small they could fit in a man's palm, snuggled together for warmth while they slept. "Oh my God," Takoda breathed, understanding flooding through him. "You were carrying Maska's babies." Ayana approached the tiny pups and gently nuzzled them with her nose, her tail wagging with a happiness that seemed to light up the entire canyon. The pups stirred at their mother's touch, making small mewing sounds that were the most beautiful music Takoda had ever heard. "He lives on," Takoda whispered, tears streaming down his face as he watched the miracle before him. Maska lives on in the next few weeks, transformed the hidden canyon into something magical. Takoda watched in wonder as the 4 pups grew rapidly under their mother's devoted care. There were 3 males and 1 female, and each had their own distinct personality that emerged more clearly every day. The largest male, who seemed destined to be as big as his father, was bold and adventurous, constantly wandering away from his siblings to explore the canyon. Takoda named him Koda, meaning friend in Apache, because he showed no fear of humans and often tumbled over to play at Takoda's feet. The second male was more cautious and thoughtful, always watching and learning before acting. His careful nature reminded Takoda of the old Apache scouts, so he called him Naunish, meaning he works hard. The third male was the smallest of the brothers, but had the strongest voice, often leading his siblings in impromptu howling sessions that echoed beautifully off the canyon walls. Takoda named him Bidzil, meaning he is strong, because his spirit was clearly unbreakable despite his small size. The female was pure silver like moonlight, with her father's intelligent yellow eyes and her mother's graceful movements. She was clearly going to be a beauty, but more than that, she had an almost mystical quality about her, as if she carried some ancient wisdom in her small body. Takoda called her Ayanyana, after her mother, but quickly shortened it to Anna when it became clear she needed her own identity. Watching Ayana with her pups healed something broken in Takoda's heart. Her maternal instincts had given her a new purpose, a reason to be strong and brave and hopeful about the future. She was still sad about Maska's death. Takoda often caught her staring off into the distance with a faraway look in her eyes, but the pups had shown her that love creates more love, that life finds a way to continue even in the face of terrible loss. As summer turned to autumn and the pups grew from helpless infants into playful juveniles, Takoda found himself changing as well. The rage and grief that had consumed him after Maska's death slowly gave way to something deeper and more sustaining, a sense of purpose, of belonging, of being exactly where he was meant to be. He had become the protector and provider for this unusual family. He hunted to supplement Ayana's diet while she was nursing. He gathered herbs to treat minor injuries and illnesses. He told stories to the pups in the evenings, watching their bright eyes reflect the firelight as they listened to tales of their father's courage and kindness. Most importantly, he made sure they understood they were part of something larger than themselves, a chain of love and loyalty that connected them to all the creatures of the forest, to the spirits of their ancestors, to the eternal cycle of life and death and rebirth that governed all things. One crisp morning in late October, exactly 1 year after he had first freed Maska from the barbed wire, Takoda sat by the stream watching the 4 young wolves play in the shallows. They were nearly full-grown now, almost ready to make their own way in the world. Soon he knew they would begin to feel the call of the wild, the need to establish their own territories and find their own mates. Ayana approached and sat beside him, pressing her shoulder against his side in a gesture of companionship that had become their morning ritual. She was getting older. The stress of raising 4 pups alone had aged her beyond her years, but she was still beautiful, still graceful, still filled with the quiet dignity that had first drawn Takoda to her. "They're going to leave soon, aren't they?" he asked her quietly. "It's their time." Ayana looked at her children playing in the water, then back at Takoda, and he saw understanding in her eyes. She knew as he did that this perfect time in their lives was coming to an end. The pups were ready to be wolves in the fullest sense, to take their father's legacy and spread it throughout the mountains. That evening, as they all gathered around the fire, Takoda told them one final story. "There was once a great Apache warrior," he began, his deep voice carrying easily across the canyon, "who learned that true strength comes not from the size of your body or the power of your weapons, but from the size of your heart and your willingness to love without reservation. This warrior made friends with the wolves of the mountains, and through that friendship he discovered that all living things are connected by invisible threads of understanding and compassion." The young wolves listened intently, their eyes reflecting both the firelight and something deeper, the wisdom that comes from being raised with love and surrounded by stories that teach the important truths of life. The warrior and his wolf friends faced many dangers together, Takoda continued, and sometimes they suffered great losses, but they learned that love doesn't die when we lose those we care about. It just changes form, becomes part of the wind and the water and the stars. It lives on in the children we raise, the kindness we show to strangers, the way we choose to face each new day with courage and hope. As his story ended, Takoda looked around at the family he had been given by fate and held together by love. Tomorrow might bring changes, separations, new challenges, but tonight they were all together in their magical canyon, surrounded by ancient walls that had sheltered love stories for countless generations. "Thank you, Maska," he whispered to the stars beginning to appear overhead. "Thank you for showing me what family really means." A gentle breeze stirred through the canyon, carrying scents of pine and wildflowers, and something that might have been a wolf's contented sigh. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called to its mate, and the stream sang its eternal song of continuity and peace. Takoda Whitehorse, the gentle giant who had learned to speak the language of wolves, closed his eyes and smiled. He had lost a brother, but gained a family. He had known heartbreak, but discovered that a broken heart, when properly healed, could hold even more love than before. The pups would leave soon to write their own stories across the mountains. Ayana would age gracefully, secure in the knowledge that her mate's legacy would live on through their children. And Takoda would continue his role as guardian and guide, making sure that the ancient bond between his people and the wolves was never forgotten. In the hidden canyon where love had conquered loss, the fire burned low and the stars shone bright, and all was well with the world. As Takoda drifted off to sleep surrounded by his wolf family, 4 young voices joined their mothers in a gentle lullaby that echoed off the ancient walls, a song of gratitude, of remembrance, of hope for all the tomorrows yet to come. Maska's spirit lived on, carried forward by love into a future bright with infinite possibilities. 5 years later, Takoda still lived in the hidden canyon, now shared with Ayana and Anna, who had chosen to stay close to home rather than venture out on her own. The 3 males had eventually left to establish territories throughout the mountains, but they often returned to visit, sometimes bringing mates and pups of their own. The canyon had become the heart of a growing wolf population that ranged throughout the region, all carrying Maska's gentle spirit and Dakota's teachings about coexistence with humans. Hunters still occasionally ventured into the mountains, but they found the wolves too clever, too well protected, too connected to the land to be easily caught, and sometimes on nights when the moon was full and the forest was quiet, the people living in the valley below would hear something beautiful drifting down from the mountains, the sound of wolves and a human voice singing together in perfect harmony, creating music that spoke of love, loss, healing, and the eternal hope that tomorrow would bring new reasons to believe in the goodness of the world.